London, 1888. The heart of the greatest empire in the world beat with progress, wealth, and industrial might. But just beyond the glittering lights of Westminster and the polished streets of the West End lay a very different world. In the East End, in the district of Whitechapel, the air was thick with smoke, poverty, and despair. Narrow alleys twisted like veins of disease, lined with rotting brick houses and dim gas lamps that flickered weakly against the choking fog. The streets smelled of coal, sweat, and gin. Women sold their bodies for a few coins, children, barefoot and hungry, scavenged through garbage heaps, men staggered from taverns, drunk and angry. This was not the London of high society. This was a city forgotten, a place where misery lived and where death waited, and in the late summer of 1888, a shadow emerged from this darkness. A figure without a face, without a name, whose cruelty would forever change the way the world understood fear. He would be called Jack the Ripper. It began on the last day of August, 1888. Marion Nichols, known simply as Polly to her friends, was a 43-year-old woman. Life had been cruel to her, failed marriages, endless poverty, and nights spent on the cold stone steps of lodging houses when she couldn't afford a bed. That night, she wandered the streets of Whitechapel, wearing a tattered bonnet and a threadbare shawl, searching for enough money to secure a place to sleep. At 3:40 a.m. in Bucks Row, her lifeless body was discovered by a cart driver. The gas lamp overhead barely illuminated the scene, but what was visible was horrifying. Polly's throat had been slashed so deeply that her head was nearly severed. Worse still, her abdomen had been brutally mutilated, her body opened by a hand that knew exactly where to cut. When police arrived, they were shocked. London had seen murders before. This was a violent city, but the ferocity of this crime was something else. It was not just murder. It was slaughter. The newspapers exploded with the news the next morning. The people of Whitechapel whispered to one another in fear. Some said it must have been a butcher. Others swore it was the work of a mad doctor. Whatever he was, he had only just begun. Only a week later, the horror returned. On September 8, Annie Chapman was found dead in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. Her body, too, was mutilated, her throat slit, her abdomen grotesquely torn open. Pieces of her organs were missing. For the first time, people realized this was no ordinary killer. There was a pattern. A method. A cold, deliberate purpose. Fear spread through Whitechapel like a plague. Women refused to walk the streets at night. Lodging housekeepers barred their doors earlier than usual. And yet, poverty was stronger than fear. Many women still had no choice but to step into the darkness, knowing a monster was waiting. The press found a story that would sell. Sensational headlines screamed across the city: horrible murder in Whitechapel, and fiendish outrage on women. Each article fanned the flames of terror, and the killer fed on it. London had seen crime before, but never like this, because this was only the beginning. By late September, Whitechapel was no longer the same. The alleys seemed darker, the fog thicker, and every shadow looked like death waiting. Women glanced behind their shoulders constantly, and men spoke in hushed voices inside smoky taverns. Rumors spread faster than the fog itself. Some claimed the killer was a foreigner, perhaps a sailor from the docks. Others whispered about a wealthy doctor who roamed the slums for victims. The poor turned against the rich, the locals turned against immigrants. Suspicion infected everyone. The police were overwhelmed. Detectives searched every lodging house, questioned every butcher, doctor, and barber. Yet every night the Ripper remained one step ahead, as if he was watching them, mocking them. Whitechapel lived in terror, and London newspapers made sure that fear reached every home across the city. The killer had no face, no name. Only his bloody signature. On September 27, 1888, a letter arrived at the Central News Agency. It was written in red ink, dripping with mockery. "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I am down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha! Ha! My knife's so nice and sharp I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." The name struck like lightning. The newspapers published it immediately, and the world suddenly knew the faceless killer not just as a murderer but as a legend. Jack the Ripper became a brand of terror, etched in ink and blood. Whether or not the letter was genuine, no one cared. The name stuck. And every new murder carried his signature. On the night of September 30th, London discovered horror on a scale it had never seen before. At 1 a.m., the body of Elizabeth Stride was found in Dutfield's yard. Her throat was cut, but her body bore no mutilations. Some believed the killer had been interrupted. Less than an hour later, the nightmare doubled. Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square. This time, the mutilations were brutal, almost surgical. Her face was slashed beyond recognition, her abdomen torn open, and her organs carefully removed. 2 women, 2 murders, within the same hour. The press called it the double event. The city reeled. The police were humiliated. And Jack the Ripper had just carved his name into history with blood. November 9, 1888. A bitter cold morning, at 13 Miller's Court, Mary Jane Kelly, just 25 years old, lived in a small single-room dwelling. She was the youngest, most vibrant of all the victims. That night, neighbors heard her singing softly, perhaps to drown the loneliness. By dawn, her voice was gone. When the landlord's assistant forced the door open at 10:45 a.m., the room was a vision of hell itself. Mary Jane Kelly's body lay on the bed, mutilated beyond comprehension. Her face was destroyed, her chest and abdomen ripped open, her organs scattered across the room. Unlike the others, he had all the time he wanted. And he used it. Detectives and doctors, hardened men who had seen countless corpses, staggered out of that room pale and trembling. One whispered, "This is the work of a madman, or a devil." By now, the police were drowning in failure. Detectives patrolled the streets in disguise, officers flooded Whitechapel at night, and rewards were offered for information. They interviewed hundreds of suspects, foreigners, butchers, doctors, sailors, but every clue dissolved into smoke. Witnesses contradicted themselves, false confessions piled up, and the public mocked the police in the newspapers. Scotland Yard's reputation was bleeding as badly as the victims. The press feasted on the chaos, publishing sketches, sensational headlines, and supposed Ripper letters. London wasn't just afraid anymore, it was obsessed. People collected newspaper clippings, compared theories, and spread conspiracy whispers. Was it a member of the royal family? A doctor with forbidden knowledge? A sadist hiding among the poor? Jack the Ripper wasn't just a murderer. He had become a ghost haunting the entire city. And then, silence. After Mary Jane Kelly's horrific murder, the killing stopped. Whitechapel waited night after night, expecting the Ripper to strike again. But the shadow never returned. Theories multiplied. Some claimed he died or fled London. Others believed he was imprisoned for another crime. Some whispered he had grown bored and vanished like smoke, but the truth? No one ever knew. Jack the Ripper simply dissolved into the London fog, leaving behind only corpses, blood-soaked headlines, and an eternal question: who was he? The mystery has survived over 130 years, feeding books, films, and nightmares. He remains the faceless phantom of London, the killer who invented modern fear. For months, Whitechapel lived under an invisible blade. Women refused to walk alone at night. Families barred their doors, clutching candles as the fog rolled in. The East End's narrow alleys, once buzzing with desperate activity, became haunted corridors of dread. Each shadow seemed to hold a killer. Each footstep echoed like a warning. Children grew up hearing whispers about Leather Apron or the Ripper as if he were a monster lurking under their beds. Housewives trembled at the thought of venturing out for bread. Prostitutes, who had no choice but to work the streets, carried the weight of their own potential death sentences. Fear was no longer just an emotion, it became part of London's identity. The Ripper murders exposed a raw nerve in London society. The East End was filthy, overcrowded, and poor, its inhabitants considered expendable by the wealthier classes. When the victims were killed, many in the West End dismissed the deaths as inevitable. To them, prostitutes were not women with names and lives, but shadows of society. But the murders forced the privileged to confront a reality they ignored. Poverty was not just a distant problem, it was a breeding ground for horror. Journalists painted vivid portraits of the East End, shocking upper-class readers with descriptions of rat-infested tenements and starving families. For perhaps the first time, London's elites could not turn away. The Ripper had made Whitechapel everyone's problem. Jack the Ripper wasn't only a murderer, he was the first media-made monster. Newspapers competed for readers with lurid headlines: "Ghastly Murder in Whitechapel. Another woman slain by the fiend." Illustrations showed blood-soaked cobblestones and shadowy figures wielding knives. Circulation numbers soared. The Ripper had created a new industry, fear as entertainment. For the first time, crime reporting became sensational, feeding the public's morbid curiosity. This hysteria would echo into the 20th and 21st centuries, shaping how media covers serial killers. From Ed Gein to Ted Bundy, Jack the Ripper was not just a killer. He was the spark that lit the age of fear-driven journalism. Even after the killings stopped, the fear lingered. Generations later, families in Whitechapel still pass down the stories as warnings. The name Jack the Ripper became synonymous with evil itself, a shadow that outlived its own time. Some psychologists argue that the Ripper murders created the first collective urban trauma. People didn't just fear the unknown killer, they feared the idea that anyone, your neighbor, your friend, even a passing stranger, could hide such savagery. Londoners carried this unease for decades. The East End, already stigmatized, became permanently branded as the home of unspeakable horrors. Where there is legend, there are imitators. In the years following 1888, newspapers reported cases of men who claimed to be Jack the Ripper, scrawling his name on walls, sending letters, and even committing violent crimes in his shadow. Some were hoaxes. Others were genuine killers inspired by the myth. The Ripper had opened a dark door, murderous spectacle. Future serial killers, from the Zodiac in California to the Yorkshire Ripper in England, borrowed his methods, his name, or his aura of terror. They understood, like Jack, that the media was a weapon as sharp as any knife. Jack the Ripper didn't just kill 5 women. He defined the archetype of the modern serial killer. He chose vulnerable victims, he struck without warning, then disappeared into the night. He taunted the police, directly or indirectly, through the press. He fed off public fear as much as blood. In doing so, he became the first killer to merge crime with performance, an artist of terror who painted his canvas in alleyways and newspapers. Every serial killer who followed, whether consciously or not, walked in the Ripper's footsteps. The Ripper investigation produced dozens, perhaps hundreds, of suspects. But a few names have echoed through history. Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher found drowned in the Thames shortly after the murders. Some believed his suicide ended the killings. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant, mentally unstable, living in Whitechapel. Later confined to an asylum, he was long considered a prime suspect. Michael Ostrog, a Russian doctor and criminal, though evidence against him was thin. George Chapman, aka Severin Klasowski, a Polish-born barber convicted of poisoning his wives years later. Detectives wondered if he had a darker past with a knife, yet, despite police files and witness reports, none could be definitively tied to the murders. By the early 20th century, whispers grew louder. Was Jack the Ripper a man of power? Some theorists pointed to Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria. They claimed he had secret relationships with East End women and that the murders were part of a cover-up. Others accused the Freemasons, arguing that the precise mutilations resembled ritualistic symbolism. In this telling, Scotland Yard itself was complicit, hiding the truth to protect the establishment. Though historians largely dismiss these theories, they fueled endless fascination. The idea of the world's most famous monarchy hiding a killer was too intoxicating to ignore. Another theory insisted the Ripper must have been a doctor or surgeon. The incisions on the victims were precise, too precise, some argued, for an untrained hand. Others suggested he was a butcher, familiar with the anatomy of animals, if not humans. The most chilling possibility? That Jack the Ripper was none of these things. That he was just an ordinary man, someone who blended perfectly into the fog, invisible except for the trail of horror he left behind. In the end, every suspect was both plausible and impossible. The deeper investigators searched, the darker and more confusing the labyrinth became. The Ripper murders forever changed London. They forced the city to confront poverty, gender inequality, and the vulnerability of women in a society that considered them disposable. For the poor of Whitechapel, the killings confirmed what they already knew: the world did not care if they lived or died.